Jason, if I may, said that very well when he talked about working with young people on how can you get them engaged. How can you make that kind of activity, this kind of dialogue, part of the priority? Maybe that's something that we can really take on our shoulders as a responsibility, because these youth are the future. They are the future, and they have to get on board, and they have to believe in that. Now, some of the don'ts of interfaith dialogue, obviously, is stay away from a marathon of pain. When people start to talk about difficult issues, challenging issues, if you're going to talk about the Holocaust, you're going to talk the suffering of Jewish people, suffering of the Palestinians, what happened in the Palestinian-Israeli, it's not useful to get into a marathon of pain. Who suffered more? It is much better to say, we have a tragic situation, we have a difficult conflict, it's been going on for years, how can we collectively work together to try to overcome some of these barriers? In other words, have a mentality that is more geared towards being forward-looking, right? It's never again for everybody, right? And we want to make sure we're working towards justice and solidarity rather than engaging in who suffered more. Was your pain greater than mine? No, no, no. My pain was greater than yours. It does not get you really anywhere, right? So that's a very important thing. Pointing fingers of blame does not get you anywhere. Putting the responsibility on the other party's shoulder alone is not going to get you anywhere. And obviously we talked about civility and being civil and decent in your dialogue. All of these things are very important. Another very important point that my friend Kay raised is don't talk about issues that could be thorny and sensitive before you build a relationship of trust. In the sisterhood of Salam Shalom, we're not allowed to talk about sensitive issues or thorny issues, the elephant in the room, Palestine-Israeli conflict, before we really get to know each other very well for a long period of time. Because then when you talk, I know that your heart is in the right place. You know that my heart is in the right place. We are not harboring negative or bad feelings for each other. So you're going to say, if I say something, you're going to interpret it within the right context, and vice versa. That's very, very important. And one of the things that also worked very well was an activity called fishbowl. And the fishbowl activity basically is having members of a group, let's say for example Muslims, are around the table and they're talking about a certain issue that relates to what do you find to be uniquely beautiful about Judaism, right? And then you have our Jewish cousins around us in a circle and they listen to us while we're talking about this, right? So I think I mentioned the Shabbat. Shabbat, because I never unplug. I'm always like working all the time. I have a work-work balance rather than a work-life balance. So I believe I would really benefit from the concept of Sabbath. Like basically that's it, drop everything off. I would love to experience that. I think that one day I'm gonna just have a Jewish life on one of the weekends and just say that's it. Sabbath, that's it. Friday evening until Saturday evening, you're not gonna do anything Sahar, that's it. You and your faith, and that's it. So basically, I said that's very beautiful. And I heard some of my Jewish cousins talk about the beauty of some of the Islamic practices that they felt touched their heart. So things like that, you learn about others. And my final point will be, people who think falsely that engaging in this type of dialogue will make you lesser of a Jew or lesser of a Muslim or lesser of a Christian, that's false. It makes you stronger in your own faith rather than weaker in your own faith. And I think Jason said something to this effect, that you learn about not just others, but you also learn about yourself and your faith tradition. So you become a stronger and better informed Muslim or Jew by engaging in this type of dialogue.
I'll add just a few points. First of all, and I think it's been noted implicitly, but I want to make it explicit, I think we need to center our stories, not in place of looking at texts and talking about theological or political issues, but I think personal stories are really powerful, and particularly in the context of building the sort of relationships that have been discussed. Dean and I, breaking news, Dean and I had some different views on Israeli-Palestinian issues. It's not that we can't or shouldn't talk about those issues. I'm not always sure that discussing the politics is actually going to get us someplace productive, but when I hear Dean talk about his story, that opens my mind to better understand the experience of who I'm dealing with both individually and collectively. It allows me to bring forth a level of compassion that a dispute on facts or a discussion of history isn't going to bring forward. And compassion isn't the only thing, but it's a big thing. And if we can all hear each other's stories, really hear them, and then bring forth our compassion, that puts us in a better place to move forward with the rest of the conversations. It's not the only thing, but I think it's important. Dean mentioned going in not looking to convert one another religiously, and I would add on that I think it's important that we not go in looking to convert one another politically. That the idea isn't, I'm coming in, we're going to discuss a divisive issue, I'm right, you're wrong, my goal for the next 2 hours is to convince you that I'm right. You know, as you said with the religious conversion piece, right? I'm not saying that I'm not going to be happy if I convince you that you're wrong, I'm right? But that can't be the goal. That's not, the goal has to be really hearing, learning, understanding, being able to move forward in a way that better understands the range of issues, the range of perspectives, the lived experiences with these issues, at least in an interfaith context. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for advocacy on our respective beliefs in other spaces, but in that space, I don't think that's the effective mindset. I think it's really important that folks participating in these sorts of initiatives feel ownership over them. And particularly I'm attuned to this because I feel like young people are so often provided with experiences that they're simply passive participants in, and very often that really kind of misses the mark. For me at least, when I think about the educational experiences, the transformative experiences that have left a real mark for me, they're all experiences in which I've felt ownership, where I've been able to help shape the experience, where it has been mine as much as anyone's. I haven't been a passive participant, so I think that's critical. And the last point I'll make, and it may relate more to the Jewish community than the Muslim community, I don't know. Dean mentioned folks maybe feeling unprepared to engage in these sorts of conversations. I think for many Jews, that unpreparedness isn't about not knowing enough about Islam or Muslims. It's about not feeling like they know enough about Judaism and Jewish life and Jewish community. We have in our community a real challenge with education. I have no idea if the dynamics are similar in the Muslim American community, but it's a real challenge because to expect somebody to come into a space and engage as a Jew when they don't feel confident or comfortable as a Jew, when they don't feel secure in their identity, their understanding of what it means for them to be a Jew. Not suggesting everyone needs to be a Jewish scholar, but we as a community need to improve our educational efforts so that Jews feel confident living Jewish lives that work for them, not one size fits all, but meaningful Jewish lives for themselves. That's going to allow them to confidently engage in interfaith dialogue and action, as Dean rightly put it, comfortable in their own skin. They're going to run away from it if they don't feel secure as Jews, because that's just putting them in a sphere. To come in face with somebody who's, I don't understand their tradition and I don't understand my tradition, why would I put myself in that place? At least in the Jewish community, that's I think, our job, because everything else has to build on that.
Can I just add quickly something very quickly to what Jason said? Just 1 second?
Sure.
Yeah. I think this is a very important point, Jason, about the youth. If you really want to get them on board, I think the experience is shared. The American Muslim community also, there is this kind of need for young people to, as you said exactly, be more confident about who they are and their identity. And when I hear people talk about minorities, like basically one of the experiences we have in common as Jews and Muslims is we are minorities, right? So there's always this fear of like, oh my God, we're gonna, our kids, our children, our grandchildren are gonna lose their identity. 1, 2, 3 generations from now, are they gonna identify as Jewish? Are they gonna identify as Muslim? Right? And I'd be lying to you if I told you this is not one of my fears. And I've heard Jewish friends who have the same fear. And I hear people saying, like, my great-grandmother was a Muslim. Or my great ancestors were Jewish. I'm like, what happened to your identity? You know what I mean? Like, basically, they lost touch with the faith. And that's something that I would not be happy about. I want people to be strong in their own faith traditions and their own identity, whether they're Jewish or Muslim. And I think getting these young people on board and having them educated and confident enough in their own identity, knowing who they are, knowing their history and religion, and then that would be a leeway to get them also interested in engaging in this type of dialogue is very important, but I don't have all the answers as to how we can best do it. So I guess that can be another conversation for maybe a JIDS session. We can have young people themselves, maybe young Jews and young Muslims, talk in their own words about their own experiences and how we can get them on board. And one last thing is about the leaders in the communities. I think we had a very successful experience with a summit called the Summit of Imams and Rabbis. And that means really getting the leaders in the faith communities on board, getting the imams and getting the rabbis involved and invested in this type of activity is extremely important, because once you get them on board, then you will be able to get their followers and their congregation on board as well. So that's another important thing to keep in mind, the faith leaders, imams and rabbis, and how to get them on board. Thank you.
Can I make 2 really short points?
Sure, absolutely.
Just I hope I was clear when when I said the students don't feel knowledgeable enough, I meant the Muslim students don't feel knowledgeable enough about Islam. Okay? And then the other point regarding that, you know, it doesn't serve a productive purpose to talk about whose pain is worse than the others. I agree with that. What serves a productive purpose is to make people understand my pain is like your pain.
Good, very good. You've been a very patient audience, and we thank you. We're now going to invite you into the conversation, and I think Becca will have a microphone for you. Just two cautionary notes. Please make your question a question and not a statement, please. And our panelists, please respond with short answers so we can get as many questions in as possible in the last half hour we have together.
Basically, follow my example, being a very brief person, right?
I'm sorry, I lost my hearing, so.
I'm going to follow your lead.
Sure.
Hi, this question is for Jason. If I was following what you were saying, you and Dr. Ahmad had a conversation about the parts of your religions, respective religions, that may have said something negative about the other's religion, and you were able to have that conversation. I'm really interested in knowing how, I'm sure that could be a topic of discussion for an hour or so, but just briefly, what you would recommend to us, that when those things come up in conversation, how do you reconcile that in your own religion, or how do you respond to other people who bring that up so that it's not a conflict?
Yeah, and Dean may have a reaction to that as well. You know, I think it comes back to the point that's been made again and again, that it's the spirit in which we interact. And I know when you know, Dean shared with me something that I didn't previously understand about Islam that was hard for me to hear. I knew that he wasn't expressing it to hurt me. I knew that we were having a real conversation of colleagues who were trying to learn and understand, and you know, that I had to hear it in the spirit, which was he was trying to help me better understand Muslim beliefs. And he wasn't being mean, and you know, and vice versa. And I think it does come back to the relationship building piece. And you know, this hasn't been in the context generally of an ongoing program, right? We're colleagues, we see each other, you know, once or twice a week. We make casual conversation and sometimes less casual conversation. And it's not that we spend inordinate amounts of time together, but we've built up a rapport. There's a trust that I think, there's an assumption of goodwill and good-naturedness to go around. And I think, you know, that's all. I don't know that I've ever seen a magic bullet or you know, a perfect way that you do that. You just build goodwill over time, the same way you would in any other context. And you know, I feel like the relationship we've been able to build over the last number of years is such that if in fact he said something to me that was something that I couldn't just say, oh, that's interesting, okay, like that hurts a little bit, but I get that that's. And he's just sharing with me, what his tradition has to say. If it was more than that, and I was hurt and couldn't simply process it and say, "Oh, that's interesting," that we'd have that conversation, and I know that he would receive that feeling back in a constructive way. And again, the point isn't to make one another agree. It's not to convince one another, to convert one another. I don't know that I have any tricks other than, you've got to build some goodwill first, and then when you talk about these things, that goodwill carries you through a little bit.
Thank you. Next.
At the risk of being long-winded, you all did a great job. So I have to start with that. So I guess my question, normally at JIDS we allow people to make statements, not questions. We always say this is a dialogue society, not a speakers bureau, but I will end it with questions. What I didn't hear, and I heard so much, is in terms of the problems, what is really tangibly accomplished by all this crap? I mean, what is the point of this? What are we getting out of this? Or are you just talking? I hear that complaint a lot. You're just preaching to the choir. Where are the Orthodox Jews? Where are the fundamentalist Muslims, the hardcore people? What's the point of this? I want those people to come. Hear that a lot. What I don't hear, but what I experience is, what little time I have for this, where it's high on my priority list, is comfort food. And it's not comfort food to hear Kumbaya middle school intellectually void junk, or to hear people fight. What's in it for me? On the other side of the ledger, how do you keep this going, okay? Shared beloveds. When I started this with Muslims, mostly Muslim men, how many of them are here? It was, I had to witness to my love for God, how intense that love is. That's how I was able to reach a male Muslim audience. When I was trying to talk to groups about twinning, right? And a Jewish synagogue who wanted to twin with Muslims, I said, well, find the people who really love the name, adore the name, because they will come together like you both love the same child together. And one of the people said, well, we don't have too many people like that here. But it's the idea of shared beloved. Middle East peace should be a shared beloved, although we encounter the complaint, all this Israel-Palestinian stuff, we're from the Indian subcontinent. That's not our debate. Why don't we talk about the India-Pakistani conflict? But the idea of a shared beloved can really bring people together. And finally, I haven't heard the word patience tonight. And Andra, there you are. Andra's friend Gabriel, whenever he gets the chance. Gabriel's a real Sufi. As in, like, you see him, and that's a Sufi, platonic form, right? And all he says to me is one word, patience, patience. And I've seen groups try to twin and stop twinning because they lose patience. And they think everything should be right out there for them. We had a lot of complaints about the Gaza war discussion because where are all the Muslims? So it was this, there's not enough Muslims here. I mean, it was a wonderful dialogue, but I heard people not like it because of that. If you're going to quibble, this is not for you. Anyway, those are my comments. You can say, and would you agree with any of that's my question or disagree? So I'll put it that way. But it was great, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. People?
Well, the question, what is accomplished, that's the hardest thing to measure because I don't know what gauge you had to go by. But I've always believed that you change things starting with individuals. Now, at the same time, that also means that I'm as concerned as you are about the preaching to the choir thing. We're not changing any individuals if we're talking to the individuals who have already been touched.
By the way, that wasn't me making that demand. I was just talking about what other people say when they challenge.
Well, I think it's a good question. In other words, I'm not saying that it's not worth what we're doing here. But the question is, how do we reach the people who aren't here? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had an answer to that question when he gave his famous farewell pilgrimage. At the end of his sermon, he asked the crowd, "Have I delivered the message?" They said yes, and he took the heavens and he said, "Bear witness." And then he said to the crowd, "Those who are here, tell those who are not here." And that's the way it's got to go. Admittedly, the people you're probably going to be able to reach are the people who are already close to you. But they then can go and reach out to others. That's just the way things spread. And it's the personal contact that's really important. Because, in the cynicism and the incivility of our era is largely magnified due to the fact that the gossip is being spread by impersonal media. So the counteraction to that is to go out and to reach out to people, to talk to people.
And if I just was to add to that, please, I'll just say that now we have an advantage, which is really social media, right? The mainstream media has pretty much been part of the problem, not part of the solution. I'm a professor of communication, so I believe that, unfortunately, we can point fingers of blame to mainstream media to a large extent for the rise of bigotry and hatred, Islamophobia, a lot of the negative feelings and stereotyping of the other, the skewed and distorted images and representations and misrepresentations that a lot of people, especially those who never met, right, a member of the other group or the other faith community. I always say all it takes is meeting one person, one good person from the other side. It changes a lot of things. people who never ever met a single Muslim man or Muslim woman in their life, and all they see are these scary images, right, of crazy groups like Qaeda or ISIS,